Okay, let's dive straight in. We're looking at something ancient today, uh, Stoicism, and exploring how this philosophy, from thousands of years ago, actually feels incredibly relevant.
Absolutely. It offers these surprising keys to finding calm resilience, even in our pretty hectic modern lives.
Yeah, and it even connects to things like modern psychological therapies, which is kind of wild.
It really is. We've got a bunch of interesting sources here, some original texts from guys like Seneca, Epictetus.
The actual Stoics?
Yeah, the originals. And then we also have modern analyses that draw this like direct line between their ideas and cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Right, CBT. So many people are familiar with that.
Exactly. So the connection spans centuries. It's quite something.
And our mission here really is to cut through the complexity, go deep into these texts, pull out the most important insights, the real
The
wisdom.
practical stuff.
Yes. And figure out how this isn't just, dusty old philosophy,
Mm.
but maybe a genuine shortcut for you, listening right now, to navigate stress complexity.
And find a bit more groundedness, less feeling tossed about by everything happening around us.
Exactly. It's about finding those tools, right, for building that inner resilience that doesn't depend so much on whether things outside are going perfectly.
Precisely. A kind of inner stability.
So let's jump right into that surprising link you mentioned,
Mm.
Stoicism and modern therapy. When I hear Stoic, I sometimes think, I don't know, unemotional.
That's a common misconception, yeah.
But you're saying it's deeply connected to therapies like CBT, which are all about managing thoughts and feelings for better mental health. How deep does that link actually go?
Oh, it goes very deep. The sources are pretty clear that modern cognitive therapies, especially CBT and even its precursor, RABT,
Yeah.
rational emotive behavior therapy, yeah, they owe a huge debt to Stoicism. It's almost like you could think of a modern therapist as a kind of applied philosopher.
Applied philosopher. I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
So this isn't just like a vague inspiration.
Not at all. The big names who developed these therapies, people like Dr. Albert Ellis for REBT, Aaron T. Beck for cognitive therapy, they actually talked about the Stoic roots in their own work.
Wow. So what's the core idea then? The thing that connects them across all that time?
Well, it's captured perfectly by Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher from way back in the first century.
Okay.
He had this famous quote, and apparently they used to teach it to clients in the early days of REBT. It goes, "Man is disturbed not by things, but by the views he takes of them."
The views he takes of them.
Mm.
Okay. So it's not the traffic jam itself that makes me mad. It's my view of the traffic jam, my judgment about it.
Precisely. Or another way Epictetus put it, it's not the events that upset us, but our judgments about the events.
Mm.
And then you jump forward almost 2,000 years and you hear Albert Ellis saying something remarkably similar. People don't just get upset. They contribute to their upsetness.
Wow, contribute to their upsetness. That's such a direct echo. It really shifts the power, doesn't it? Away from blaming the external thing.
And towards looking at your own internal reaction, your
Yeah.
interpretation.
Yeah. And you mentioned this wasn't even totally new in the 20th century.
Right. The sources mention other psychotherapists, even earlier, like Paul Dubois. Apparently, he was using Stoic ideas in his clinical work, even assigning passages from Seneca as homework.
Assigning Seneca as homework.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah. So the core Stoic idea feeding into modern therapy is really about developing self-control, fortitude,
Inner strength.
inner strength. Yeah, by becoming a clearer thinker, a less biased thinker. It's about managing those potentially destructive emotions, anger, fear, whatever, by understanding where they actually come from.
Which isn't the event itself.
But your judgment about the event, your reaction to it.
Okay, that makes total sense. And it leads straight into what feels like the absolute foundation of Stoicism, right?
Yeah.
That famous distinction.
Between what is and isn't under our control. Yes, absolute fundamental. Epictetus lays it out very clearly. Some things are up to us, others just aren't.
And the list of things not up to us, according to the sources, it's a lot. Our body, our property, our reputation.
Other health even. Death, disease.
And maybe the biggest one for daily life. Other people, their actions, what they think of us.
Exactly. You can't control if someone insults you, for example. Epictetus uses that specific case.
Right.
He says if someone reviles you, the irritation, the sting, it doesn't come from them or their words directly. It comes from your judgment that you're being insulted or that being insulted is inherently a terrible thing.
Ah, okay. So the Stoic advice then is, well, it feels kind of radical. Don't waste energy trying to avoid things you can't control,
Yeah.
like getting sick or dying, or what people say.
Pretty much. If you pour all your energy into trying to avoid or avert things not under your control, you're basically setting yourself up for misery and frustration.
Because you can't guarantee success.
Exactly. So the advice is withdraw your aversion from those external things. Stop fearing them so intensely. Instead, focus your energy, your attention on what is under your control.
Which is
Your judgments, your desires, your intentions, your own responses, your inner world. For things outside your control, the idea is to deal with them, well, more lightly, without that desperate clinging or intense repulsion.
it keeps coming back to judgment, doesn't it? The traffic, the email, the bad news. The problem isn't the thing itself, but that space before you react, how you interpret it.
That's where the power lies. Gaining that moment to choose your response based on reason rather than just reacting automatically.
And this intense focus on the internal world, that leads to what you called maybe the most radical Stoic idea.
Yeah, I think so. The idea that the highest good, the only true good, isn't found in external things at all. It's found solely in virtue.
Virtue. Okay, define virtue in the Stoic sense.
They see it as perfected reason, acting in accordance, with nature, with rationality. Seneca talks a lot about this.
Right, but the really challenging part is saying virtue is the only good. And everything else, health, wealth, reputation, all that stuff.
It's different, yeah.
That just sounds wrong to us today, doesn't it? I mean, surely being healthy is good. Surely having money is better than being broke.
It sounds totally counterintuitive, I agree. It feels like it denies reality. But Seneca tries to explain it with examples.
Okay, like what?
Well, he argues that, say, a good person who happens to be rich isn't actually more good than a good person who happens to be poor. The virtue, that internal quality of reason and character, is the same. It's equally praiseworthy, whether it's in a strong, healthy body or, a sick or even tortured one.
And you mentioned that really stark example,
Mm.
reclining at a fancy dinner party versus being tortured.
Yeah, Seneca uses that contrast. His point is, neither situation is inherently good or bad in itself. The good or bad lies in how the person handles it. The virtue or the lack of virtue they display in that situation.
So the external circumstance is just raw material.
Exactly. The raw material doesn't determine the moral value. Your internal state, your virtue, does.
Okay, and this connects to how they saw human nature.
Yes, they saw us as having sort of two parts. An irrational part that's subject to pain, external forces, emotions.
The messy human bit.
Kind of, yeah. And then a rational part, which they saw as potentially fearless, unconquered, aligned with reason, and the highest good, the only true good, resides purely in that rational part.
So the whole game shifts inward. Forget measuring your life by external stuff, what car you drive, how many followers you have.
Right. Measure it by internal standards. Are you living according to reason? Are you cultivating your character? Focus on your mind and its qualities.
It feels like a massive shortcut, actually. A way past all that comparison and striving that makes us anxious.
It really can be. If virtue is the only thing that truly matters for your well-being, then a lot of the stuff society tells you to chase just becomes less important, indifferent in their terms.
Okay, so if the goal is this internal state, built on virtue, managing judgments, how do you actually do that? What are the practical techniques the Stoics recommended?
Well, one really powerful one they talk about is something called premeditatio malorum.
Premeditatio. Sounds Latin.
It is. It means roughly the premeditation of adversity.
Premeditation of adversity sounds a bit grim. Thinking about bad things on purpose.
Kind of, yeah. But not just wallowing. It's about consciously, deliberately bringing difficult possibilities to mind each day. Things like loss, poverty, exile, even death. Seneca emphasizes thinking about death.
Okay, but why? What's the point? It's not just to make yourself miserable.
No, not at all. The goal, according to the sources, is to anticipate misfortune, to mentally rehearse it in a way. By keeping these potential difficulties in mind, you're less likely to be completely shocked or feel totally devastated if they actually happen. You avoid those abject thoughts, as Epictetus puts it.
So you're not blindsided.
Exactly. And you also stop clinging quite so desperately to things you know you could lose. It reduces that excessive yearning for things to always stay the same. Seneca quotes someone saying, basically, if you anticipate hardship, no prospect of hardship comes to me new or unexpected.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like building a psychological shock absorber. You've already considered the possibility, so if it happens, you feel a bit more prepared, more assured.
Precisely. It takes away some of that raw shock, that feeling of, why me? Another really key practical area is handling passions.
Passions, you mean strong emotions like
Mm.
anger, envy, fear.
Yes, exactly. Those kinds of disruptive emotions.
So how did the Stoics say to handle those? Just, bottle them up, stiff upper lip,
Not quite bottling them up, more like checking them right at the very beginning.
catching them early.
Yes. The sources really emphasize that once a passion gets going, once that anger or fear really takes hold, it's incredibly difficult to control. It's much, much easier to stop it before it gains momentum.
So the idea of just having moderate anger is kind of pointless to them.
They seem to think so, yeah. They saw moderation in passions as a net bogus. The real issue is allowing them to start in the first place, because once they start, they tend to run away with you.
Like a small spark turning into a wildfire.
Exactly. It's like a disease, they said.
Right.
Once it's established, it's hard to cure. And what's the root cause? What lets these passions take root?
Let me guess. Valuing external things.
Bingo. If your happiness depends completely on getting that promotion, or never being criticized, or always being healthy, then you're vulnerable because those things aren't fully in your control.
Right. So when those externals are threatened or don't go your way, boom, passion erupts.
Exactly. And they also noted that repeated episodes of giving in to a passion can actually create a kind of negative disposition, like a habit of anger or fear.
Which loops right back to the idea of virtue being the only good.
Yeah.
If externals are truly indifferent to you.
Then the fuel for those disruptive passions just isn't there. They lose their power over you.
Okay. What else? Any other practical takeaways?
Yes, another really powerful point comes from Seneca, specifically about time.
Time. Okay, what did he say about time?
He makes the striking claim that time is our only truly real possession.
Our only possession.
Yeah. Everything else, he argues, our money, our house, our reputation, even our health to some degree is kind of on loan from fortune or belongs to someone else or is just temporary. It can be taken away.
But time.
But time, in the present moment, is ours. How we use this hour, this day, that's truly up to us.
And he has that really stark line, doesn't he? Something like, we are dying every day.
Yes. He says a good portion of our death has already passed us by. The time we've already lived is gone.
Wow. So
Yeah.
his advice is urgent.
Very urgent. Embrace every hour. Don't put things off. Stop postponing living. He says life isn't inherently short, but we make it feel short because we waste so much of it. Always waiting for tomorrow, delaying the things that really matter.
Oof, that really lands, especially today when it's so easy to just drift or feel like you have infinite time scrolling ahead of you.
It really does. It forces you to focus on the present, on what's important now. And speaking of what's important, or maybe what isn't, their view on external fortune, like wealth and poverty, is also really distinct.
We touched on externals being indifferent, but how do they advise actually dealing with money or lack of it?
Well, the sources mention Seneca warning that riches can actually blind people. That true happiness isn't found in accumulating wealth, but in cultivating, a great mind, an inner richness.
So it's not that money itself is evil.
No, not inherently bad, but the relentless pursuit of it or becoming dependent on it for your happiness, that's where the problems start. That can be corrosive.
Okay. So what's the alternative?
They advise measuring your needs and desires by what nature actually requires. And they argued that nature's requirements are pretty simple, easily satisfied, often for free or very little cost.
Like basic food, shelter, clothing.
Things like that.
Hmm.
The real trouble starts, they said, when we mix vices with our desires. When we start chasing things far beyond our natural needs, often driven by habit or social pressure, or just wanting more and more.
Right. Keeping up with the Joneses, basically.
Essentially. True wealth, in the Stoic view, isn't having vast riches. It's simply having enough. Having what nature desires. Satisfying those fundamental needs.
And they specifically called out focusing too much on unnecessary desires, things we want just because everyone else has them or because we're used to a certain luxury.
Yes, they saw that as a major source of error. It leads to what Seneca apparently called fussiness.
Fussiness.
Yeah, like getting anxious and upset about trivial external details, things that don't really matter for your core well-being. Chasing luxuries creates dependence and anxiety, this constant fussiness about maintaining a certain lifestyle.
It creates complication, basically.
Yeah.
And pulls you away from that simpler internal sufficiency.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have these principles, these techniques.
Yeah.
How did the Stoics see this translating into actual action and, progress in life? Is it all just internal?
No, action is crucial. Seneca apparently said action is both our responsibility and, in a way, proof that we're truly alive. He felt life is actually lengthened by meaningful action, not just by passively existing.
Right. But the journey of applying this stuff, making progress, it's not always smooth sailing, is it?
Definitely not. The sources are realistic about that. They acknowledge it's totally possible to backslide, to fall back into old habits.
Okay.
But they argue the person who is making real progress, the person who is genuinely moving towards happiness in their view, is the one who learns to embrace hardships, to see setbacks not as disasters, but as opportunities.
Opportunities.
Opportunities for what?
Opportunities to practice virtue, to build resilience,
Yeah.
to strengthen their character. It's a really powerful reframing. Instead of avoiding difficulty, you see it as necessary practice.
Okay, that changes things. And Epictetus, you mentioned, had a sense of urgency about actually starting this.
He really did. He has this pointed question, something like, how long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself? He pushes back against delaying, constantly saying, I'll start tomorrow, fixing first one day and then another.
Right, he says, don't put off reforming yourself. The present is the time. Yes, and he even says that progress can hinge on a single day or a single action. It's time to stop being like a child, he says, and decide to live like someone who is actually making progress.
And he uses that analogy, right, about the Olympics.
Ah, yes, the Olympic training analogy. It's very vivid. He says, before you jump into something demanding like training for the games or, by analogy, undertaking philosophical practice, you absolutely must consider all the hard parts up front.
All the sweat and sacrifice.
Exactly. The strict discipline, the boring diet, the painful workouts, the risk of injury, the heat, the dust, the possibility of losing.
You have to look it squarely in the face before you start.
Yes, because if you don't, if you just jump in based on initial enthusiasm, you're likely to give up disgracefully as soon as it gets tough. Like he says, children playing at being wrestlers 1 minute, gladiators the next, then actors, flitting around without real commitment.
You need to count the cost, make a conscious, informed decision about the effort involved.
Precisely. And to help with this, the sources also point to real historical figures who seemed to embody these Stoic principles. They serve as powerful role models.
Like Socrates. He comes up a few times.
Yes, Socrates is a key figure for them. They hold him up as someone who became who he was by consistently paying attention to reason in everything he did.
An example of integrity.
Yeah, integrity in difficult situations, how to face adversity, even how to handle poverty by living simply and setting an example.
And Cato the Younger, the Roman politician.
Cato's another big one, known for his incredible self-control and equanimity, even when facing huge setbacks like losing elections or being on the losing side of a civil war. He maintained his principles.
Okay. Any others mentioned?
There's an example of someone named Clarinus who apparently had significant physical impairments,
Okay.
but whose mind remained, clear and courageous. He showed that moral strength, that brave endurance wasn't dependent on having a healthy body.
It reinforces that internal focus again.
It does. And then, of course, there's Marcus Aurelius.
A Roman emperor who wrote Meditations.
Exactly. His personal journal, his reflections on applying these Stoic ideas to his own life, dealing with stress, responsibility, anxiety. People still read it today for guidance.
So these aren't just abstract ideals. These were real people trying to live this way.
Right. And that connects to a more modern point that comes up in the sources, too, this idea that setbacks shouldn't just drain you. They can actually invigorate you.
Invigorate you. How?
By seeing a problem not as a dead end, but as a chance to, build strength, use your ingenuity, figure things out, refine your approach. It's an opportunity for growth.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this all together now. Thinking about you, the listener, maybe feeling overwhelmed by, information overload, constant demands, social media pressure, unexpected problems popping up. How is all this ancient Stoic wisdom actually a practical shortcut? How does it help right now?
Well, I think the first thing is internalizing that core distinction. What you can control versus what you can't. If you can relentlessly, consistently focus your energy on your own judgments, your own responses, the internal stuff.
You immediately gain some power back.
Exactly. You gain a powerful tool against feeling overwhelmed by all the external chaos. You're just less vulnerable to stress from things outside your direct influence if your sense of well-being isn't totally tied to them.
And that other big idea, virtue as the only true good. How does that help? practically?
I think it dramatically simplifies things. Your decisions, your priorities. If your main goal is cultivating inner character, acting with reason and integrity, that becomes your North Star. It cuts through all the noise from society about what you should value: money, status, looks.
You're not chasing this endless list of external goods anymore?
Right. You're focusing on building something internal that's resilient no matter whether fortune smiles on you or not externally.
And their approach to difficult emotions, checking them early, seeing the link to valuing externals.
That gives you a framework, doesn't it? A way to understand and manage your inner world better instead of just being swept away by reactive feelings all the time.
Yeah. And seeing challenges, setbacks, not as just purely bad things, but as that raw material you mentioned.
Raw material for practicing virtue, for strengthening yourself. That reframing, along with things like the premeditation of adversity, builds genuine earned resilience. It shifts your perspective
From feeling like a victim of circumstance.
to feeling like someone who is actively building their inner strength through whatever life throws at them.
And Seneca's point, this isn't just for classrooms.
Absolutely not. He
Yeah.
said philosophy's purpose is practical. It's meant to help the soul, to free it from sadness and fear, to help purge those harmful desires that mess us up. It's about finding the tools, the weapons, as he might say, to bring peace to your own mind.
So these ancient ideas, they're not outdated relics at all. They offer a pretty direct path, maybe even a shortcut, to navigating all the complexities of modern life with a bit more calm,
Hmm.
tranquility.
Tranquility, resilience, yeah. I think that's exactly right.
So summing up, we've really seen how these core Stoic principles, focusing relentlessly on what you can control, which is basically your judgments, your character, your internal responses, how that forms the bedrock, surprisingly, for a lot of modern psychological approaches to well-being, like CBT.
Absolutely. That internal focus is key. And if living that life aligned with nature, with reason, is the Stoic path to genuine happiness and resilience, maybe here's a final thought for you to consider, drawing from Seneca again.
Okay.
What unnatural habits or external values might you be holding on to right now that are actually getting in the way of your own calm?
Like what Seneca said about measuring things by natural desires and not mixing vices in, avoiding that fussiness.
Exactly. Where in your own life might you be prioritizing things maybe driven by habit or social pressure that just create more complication, more dependence on externals, instead of focusing on what brings that true, simple sufficiency?
Something to definitely ponder as you go about your day.